Hello, my friends. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe so you never miss a new horror story. The first mistake I made was speaking out loud. I was alone in the house for the first time in years. Not for an hour, not for an evening. For 3 nights. My parents had driven out of town before dawn, leaving a note on the kitchen counter and a reminder to lock everything. I watched their car disappear through the front window, the red taillights shrinking until they vanished beyond the trees. When the sound of the engine faded, the house felt heavier. Not quiet. Aware. I told myself that was stupid. Houses weren't alive. They didn't notice when someone was alone inside them. They didn't change. Still, I locked the door behind them and slid the deadbolt into place. Then I checked the back door, then the windows, then the door again. The house was old, older than me, older than my parents. It had narrow hallways and uneven floors, and a staircase that groaned no matter how softly you stepped on it. At night it smelled faintly of dust and wood, and something else I couldn't name. I kept all the lights on that first evening. I made dinner and ate at the table instead of my room, pretending the empty chairs didn't bother me. The ticking of the clock sounded louder than usual. Every tick echoed. Tick, tick, tick. "Relax," I said out loud. The house creaked in response. I laughed nervously. "See? Just noise." The sound stopped. That should have unsettled me more than it did. Around 10 p.m., I went upstairs to my bedroom. I shut the door but didn't lock it. This was my house. I'd lived here my entire life. Locking myself in felt ridiculous. I left the hallway light on. That was my second mistake. I lay in bed scrolling through my phone, listening to the familiar sounds of the house settling, pipes knocking, wood shifting, normal things. Then I heard something that wasn't normal. Someone cleared their throat. It came from downstairs. I froze. The sound was unmistakable, human, deliberate, impatient. "Hello," I called out, hating the tremor in my voice. Nothing answered. I waited, my heart hammering. Maybe it was the TV downstairs. Maybe it was a recording and a video I'd left playing. I stood and opened my bedroom door. The hallway was empty. The stairs descended into darkness, the downstairs lights now off. I was certain I'd left them on. I hadn't turned them off. "I'm just tired," I muttered. The house creaked again. I stared at the walls, suddenly aware of how narrow the hallway felt. "Stop," I said quietly. The creaking stopped. I didn't sleep much that night. The second night was worse. I spent the day trying to convince myself nothing was wrong. I cleaned, cooked, kept the TV on constantly. Noise was comforting. Silence felt like an invitation. By evening, exhaustion weighed on me. My nerves were shot. Every shadow looked wrong. Around midnight, I heard footsteps, not creaks, footsteps. They moved slowly across the downstairs floor, pausing occasionally, as if whoever, or whatever, was walking was listening. I stood at the top of the stairs, gripping the banister. "Mom," I called, even though I knew better. The footsteps stopped. Then they turned toward the stairs, one step, then another. I backed away, my breath shallow. "No," I whispered. The steps stopped halfway up. Silence stretched. Then a voice spoke from below, not loud, not threatening, familiar. "Why are you hiding?" It sounded like me. My stomach dropped. "That's not funny," I said, though my voice cracked. The voice replied instantly. I didn't laugh. The stairs creaked as something shifted its weight. I ran back into my room and slammed the door shut, locking it this time. My hands shook as I dialed my parents. No answer. I texted them. No response. I called a friend, straight to voicemail. I sat on the floor with my back against the door, phone clutched in both hands. From the hallway, I heard footsteps approach. They stopped outside my room. A pause. Then, a knock. 3 slow taps. I held my breath. "I know you're awake," the voice said. It was still mine. "Perfectly." "You left the light on." The hallway light clicked off. Darkness seeped under the door. I screamed. The knocking stopped. Footsteps retreated. I stayed awake until dawn, staring at the door, waiting for it to open. It didn't. The third night, I decided I was done being afraid. Fear only works when you feed it. I told myself that as I locked every door and window, as I checked the basement door twice, as I dragged a chair under my bedroom handle, I turned off all the lights except my lamp. If this is my imagination, I said aloud, then it ends tonight. The house was silent. Too silent. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Then, the whisper came. Not from outside my room, from inside it. You finally noticed. I sat up so fast my head spun. The lamp flickered. Where are you? I demanded. The whisper came again, closer. Everywhere. The closet door creaked open. I hadn't touched it. The darkness inside seemed deeper than it should have been. You've been alone before, the voice said gently, but never like this. My phone buzzed in my hand. A text message from my own number. You talk too much when you're scared. The bed dipped beside me. Something sat down. I couldn't see it. I could feel it. Weight pressed into the mattress. Cold seeped through the sheets. I don't want to hurt you, the voice said. I just don't want to be alone anymore. I couldn't move. The lamp went out. In the darkness, something leaned close to my ear. You invited me when you spoke to the house. I felt breath on my skin. You listened. The pressure lifted. The bed rose. Footsteps moved away. The closet door closed. Light flooded the room as the lamp turned back on. I was alone again. I didn't sleep. In the morning, my parents came home early. I didn't tell them everything, just enough to explain the bags under my eyes, the shaking hands. They laughed gently, said the house always made noises, said being alone can play tricks on the mind. That night, with everyone home, I finally slept, until I heard someone whisper from the hallway. See? It's better when you're not alone. I never speak to the house anymore, but sometimes, when the night is quiet, it speaks to me anyway. I never believed in omens, not really. I've always thought superstition was for people afraid of living, afraid of their own shadows. But last New Year's Eve, something happened that made me reconsider. Something I still can't explain, and probably never will. It started like any other New Year's Eve. I'd been invited to a small party downtown at a friend's loft. Music, laughter, champagne, nothing too fancy, nothing too intimate. Perfect for a quiet night out with people I didn't know too well. I left my apartment around 10:30 p.m., the streets alive with the usual chaos of last-minute celebrations. Snow had started falling lightly, coating the sidewalks in white. The cold didn't bother me. In fact, it sharpened my senses. The party was small, maybe a dozen people, and the loft had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Every time a firework exploded outside, the reflections danced across the walls like sparks in a dark forest. People laughed, clinked glasses, took selfies. I wandered near the windows, sipping my drink, feeling disconnected, as I often did in social settings. Then I noticed him. Or rather, I noticed something, or someone, standing across the street. At first, I thought it was a partygoer, but there was something wrong. He, or it, was completely still, facing my direction, watching. Even through the crowd and the glass, I could feel the gaze, heavy, piercing, like it wasn't human, like it was measuring something inside me. I blinked. He, or it, was gone. I laughed nervously, assuming it was my imagination, but a chill ran down my spine that I couldn't shake. As the night went on, the party buzzed around me, but I kept glancing outside. Occasionally I'd see that figure again, always in the shadows, always watching. And then the whispers started. Soft, unintelligible murmurs at first, so faint I thought it was the wind, or maybe music from another apartment. But the whispers grew louder, threading through the music, curling around my ears. They weren't coming from anyone in the room. I tried to ignore it. I focused on the countdown clock on my phone. 11:50 p.m. 10 minutes to midnight. 10 minutes to a new year. 10 minutes to something I couldn't name. By 11:55, my unease had grown unbearable. My drink sat untouched. The air in the loft felt heavier, almost sticky, pressing against my lungs. My heartbeat thumped like a drum in my ears. Then the lights flickered. People laughed nervously, assuming it was the building's old wiring, but I froze. In that brief blackout, I saw him, or it, clearly. Across the street in the faint light of a street lamp, not human, tall, impossibly thin, the angles of his body wrong, unnatural, his face. I didn't see a face, just darkness and eyes. Too many eyes, blinking, shifting, staring. The lights came back. He was gone. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, snow, exhaustion. But then I felt it, a presence behind me, a cold brush of air along my neck. I turned. The loft was empty. Everyone else was laughing, oblivious, dancing, chatting. But the sensation didn't leave. 11:59. 1 minute left. I wanted to leave. I needed to leave. I whispered an excuse to my friends and bolted for the door. The snow had intensified. The streets were slick, eerily quiet despite the fireworks starting in the distance. That's when the whispers came again. Clear this time. Words I understood, though I don't know how. Don't leave. Stay. It's your turn. My pulse spiked. I looked around. No one, just the empty, snow-covered streets. And then, suddenly, I saw the figure again, across the street, closer, its form now taller, stretching impossibly toward the sky. Shadows clung to it, writhing like living smoke. I ran, slipping, sliding on the ice, my breath ragged. The fireworks exploded around me, dazzling bursts of red and gold that should have comforted me. But they didn't. They highlighted him, or it. Every flash made the shadows writhe, moving faster, reaching out. I reached my apartment building, threw open the door, and slammed it shut behind me. Heart pounding, I leaned against it, shaking. The lobby was empty, eerily silent. I took the elevator to the 5th floor, desperate for normalcy. My apartment door came into view, familiar and reassuring. I unlocked it and stepped inside. The lights were off. Not unusual, I often kept them off. But there was a faint smell, smoke, or something fouler. My chest tightened. I flicked the switch. Nothing. I tried the lamp. Nothing. The shadows in the room seemed wrong. They moved against the light, stretching, crawling. Then I saw it. On the floor. A single champagne glass, broken. My glass. But I hadn't even brought a drink from the party. I backed away. The whispers returned, louder now, surrounding me. Midnight. Your turn. Forever. I stumbled backward into the wall, and then the lights flickered. For the briefest instant, I saw him, or it, standing in the corner of my apartment, taller than the ceiling, eyes everywhere, darkness where his face should have been. And then he grinned. Not a human smile. A grin filled with teeth, too many teeth. I tried to scream, but my voice caught. The room began to twist. The walls expanded and contracted. My apartment felt like it was breathing. I could hear my own heartbeat, distorted, echoing in the corners. The clock on my stove ticked over to midnight. Nothing happened. Relief surged through me. Perhaps it was over. Perhaps. Then the figure moved, not walking, sliding, across the walls, across the floor, across the ceiling. Its form multiplied in every reflective surface. Every mirror, every window, every dark corner held its eyes, staring at me, following me. I backed into a corner, shaking. My phone vibrated. A message. No sender, just one line. Next year starts now. The room went black, total darkness, and the whispers became screaming. Not outside, not in my ears, but inside my head. My memories, my regrets, my fears, they all shouted at me. I saw every New Year's Eve I had celebrated, every mistake, every lonely night, every fleeting happiness, looping endlessly. Then, as suddenly as it had started, the silence. The apartment returned to normal. or as normal as it could be. My clock read 12:01 a.m. I was alive, or so I thought. I tried to move. My body obeyed, but something was off. My reflection in the mirror didn't match me. My hands moved, but the reflections didn't. My own voice. When I tried to speak, it wasn't mine. I ran to the window. Outside, fireworks illuminated the city. Life carried on. Normal. But I knew the truth. I hadn't escaped. Midnight hadn't ended. It had claimed me. And somewhere in the shadows, it waited. Watching, learning, counting down for next year. And the year after that. Forever. The city didn't collapse. There was no explosion, no blackout, no screaming headlines. That's what still bothers me. If something catastrophic had happened, people would remember. They'd talk about it. There would be footage, memorials, flowers wired to fences. But whatever went wrong in New York didn't announce itself. It edited itself. I noticed because my name disappeared first. I worked, at the Municipal Archives on Chambers Street, basement level, climate-controlled rooms full of paper records nobody ever asks for, property transfers from the 1800s, birth certificates written in ink so faded it looks like spider webs, death records stacked so densely they smell faintly sweet, like old wood. I cataloged things. That was my job, assigning numbers, making sure people stayed officially real. On a Monday morning in November, I tried to log into the system and my employee profile was gone. I assumed it was an IT error. Those happened all the time. I went to HR. The woman behind the desk scrolled through her screen, frowned, and asked me who I was visiting. "I work here," I said. She smiled politely, the smile people give when they think you're confused or unstable. "There's no record of you ever being employed by the city." I laughed, waiting for her to join in. She didn't. I showed her my ID badge. She turned it over, slowly. "This badge number belongs to someone who retired 12 years ago," she said. My stomach tightened. I left before security could be called. Outside, New York moved the way it always does. Crowded, impatient, loud, yellow taxis, sirens, people yelling into phones. The city didn't feel wrong. I did. I checked my wallet. My driver's license was there, my credit cards, my name printed clearly. But when I went home and searched myself online, the results were thin. No social media profiles, no articles, no tagged photos. Just a single property record listing me as a tenant in my current apartment. Even that document looked wrong, like it had been scanned, edited, and rescanned too many times. I tried calling my sister. The number rang, but the voice that answered wasn't hers. "Wrong number," the woman said, irritated. I texted her. "Who is this?" Came back. I sat on my couch until nightfall, watching the city through my window, feeling like I'd stepped half an inch out of alignment with reality. That's when the noise stopped. Not suddenly, carefully. The traffic faded first, then the sirens, then the distant subway rumbled beneath the street, like someone slowly lowering a volume slider. At 11:41 p.m., the city was silent. I looked outside. People were still there, frozen mid-motion. A man leaned forward, foot lifted to step off the curb. A woman's hair hung in the air behind her, caught in a wind that no longer existed. A bus sat diagonally across an intersection, its headlights casting pale cones of unmoving light. Then someone blinked. Not one of the frozen people. Someone else. Standing across the street directly below my window. He was tall, wearing a dark coat that looked too heavy for his body, like it was hanging from him rather than being worn. His face was blurred, not obscured, just unfinished, like a memory you can't quite recall. He looked straight up at me and waved. I backed away from the window. When the sound returned, it came back wrong, too loud, too fast. The city lurched forward like it had been shoved. The man across the street was gone. I didn't sleep. Over the next few days, my existence continued to thin. My bank account locked itself pending verification. My landlord knocked on my door and asked why I was squatting in an empty apartment. My name no longer appeared on the mailbox downstairs. The worst part wasn't the fear. It was the certainty growing inside me that this was intentional. On Thursday, I went back to the archives. I wasn't stopped at the door. No one noticed me at all. People walked through me like I was just slightly out of phase. Cold spread through my chest each time it happened, like static crawling under my skin. In the basement, the lights flickered. I found my section. Row C, shelf 14. There was a new box, no label, no catalog number, just my name, handwritten in black ink. Inside were documents, my birth certificate, school records, medical files, photos I didn't remember being taken, a death certificate dated 3 days in the future, cause of death, administrative correction. I heard footsteps behind me. "You found it earlier than expected," a voice said. I turned. The man from the street stood at the end of the aisle. Up close, his face was worse, features shifting subtly, struggling to stay consistent. "What is this?" I demanded. "A rollback," he replied calmly. "You weren't supposed to persist." My throat went dry. Persist from what? He gestured to the shelves. "New York accumulates errors," he said. "People who shouldn't exist. Timelines that bend too far. Data that contradicts itself." "You're saying I'm an error?" He considered this. "You're a leftover." The lights dimmed. "Most people don't notice when they're corrected," he continued. "Their memories smooth over. Their absence is absorbed." I shook my head. "No, I've lived here my whole life." "That's the problem," he said softly. "You lived in 2 versions at once." The shelves around us began to shift, boxes sliding, labels changing, names appearing, disappearing. "You saw something you shouldn't have," he said. "Years ago, a glitch in the transit system, a train that arrived where it shouldn't have." My memory stirred. A platform with no signs, a train car with no driver, a voice on the intercom repeating the same sentence in a loop. I remembered stepping off. "I came back," I whispered. He smiled, not unkindly. "You didn't." The building groaned like an animal adjusting its weight. "Your correction is already underway," he said, "but you're difficult." I ran. The stairs blurred beneath my feet. The exit door led not to the street but to another hallway, longer, darker, lined with doors that all bore my name. Behind me, footsteps followed, not fast, patient. I burst through one door and stumbled onto a street I didn't recognize. New York, but wrong. Buildings were taller, closer, pressing in. Windows reflected nothing. The sky was a dull, unmoving gray. People stood along the sidewalks, motionless, all facing inward, watching. "You're exhausting the system," the man said, suddenly beside me. "You're causing overlap." He placed a hand on my shoulder. The city shifted. I saw flashes, other versions of streets, other outcomes, fires, floods, emptiness, cities abandoned mid-sentence. "You can stop this," he said. "All you have to do is let go." I thought of my sister, my job, my life. "I don't want to disappear," I said. "You already have," he replied gently. The pressure in my chest intensified. My memories began to unravel, faces losing names, places losing meaning. "I'll stay," I said suddenly. "Here, in this version." His expression changed. "That's not an option." I looked around at the frozen people. "What if I replace you?" I asked. Silence. The city trembled. For the first time, he looked uncertain. When the noise returned, it was different, louder, angrier. "I'm writing this from the archives basement. I sit at the desk now. I catalog names that no longer belong to anyone. When someone notices too much, when they slip, I make sure their records are complete." Correct. Outside, New York hums on, unaware. If your name ever starts to fade, if the city ever goes quiet, don't look for answers, because something went wrong, and the city doesn't like to be reminded. I always thought of the desert as empty, flat, endless, dry. Nothing out there but sun and sand and maybe the occasional rattlesnake. I was wrong. The desert isn't empty. It's patient. It waits. And it knows how to make you feel smaller than you ever thought possible. It started the week I took a job surveying old abandoned wells in the Nevada desert. My task was simple: log their locations, check for collapse hazards, and mark them on a digital map. I liked quiet work, and I liked solitude. The town I came from never understood why I'd drive hundreds of miles just to wander the desert alone, but it gave me peace, or at least I thought it did. By the third day, I noticed the subtle oddities. Tracks that didn't belong to any animal I recognized, strange wind patterns that moved against the natural slope of the dunes, and shadows that didn't match the position of the sun. I brushed them off. Desert paranoia, I told myself. Heat exhaustion. I kept going. I found the first well on a ridge that overlooked a stretch of sand so wide it seemed endless. The well itself was just a rusted metal cylinder, barely rising above the sand. I leaned over to inspect it, checking for hazards when I felt it. A sudden drop in temperature, the kind of chill that seeps into your bones. I spun around, expecting maybe a cloud, some sudden wind, but there was nothing. Just desert, sun still high and glaring. I shrugged it off and wrote down the coordinates. As I packed up, I noticed something in the sand below, a single footprint, impossibly long, stretched in a straight line down the slope. I frowned. I'd driven miles alone to get here. This footprint couldn't belong to me, or anyone I knew. I snapped a picture and shook my head, thinking some kid had wandered out here as a prank. I didn't realize how wrong I was until I drove to the second well that afternoon. The desert heat was brutal, and I had the air conditioning blasting. I kept seeing movement in my side mirrors, shapes that disappeared whenever I turned my head. I laughed nervously at myself. This is what isolation does, I thought. It makes you see things. The second well was near a dry wash. I parked and walked toward it, clipboard in hand, noting the decay in the metalwork and the cracking of the stone casing. That's when I heard it. A sound so soft I thought it might be the wind, but it wasn't. It was a footstep, someone walking on sand, slow and careful. I froze. There's no one else out here. I spun around, flashlight ready, but the sand was empty. Nothing moved. I chalked it up to my imagination and continued the survey, but I kept glancing over my shoulder. Every step I took, I felt eyes on me, invisible, patient. And then I saw it. A figure standing atop the ridge I had just come down. It was tall, impossibly tall, thin, and its posture was unnatural. Its head was tilted to one side, and it seemed to watch me with interest. I froze, heart hammering. The desert was still, but I felt it pressing down, as though the air itself had weight. The figure vanished before I could react. I ran back to the truck. The interior of the cab felt suffocating. My hands trembled on the wheel as I drove to the next site, swearing I wouldn't look out the windows again. But the desert has a way of revealing itself in unexpected ways. That night, I set up camp near a cluster of rocks. The sun dipped low, and the desert seemed to stretch further, deeper into nothing. I cooked a small dinner, trying to calm my nerves, but sleep did not come easily. Shadows outside my tent stretched long and strange, bending against the contours of the rocks. I kept thinking I saw movement, flashes of black where nothing should have been. At some point, I dozed. I woke to the sound of breathing, slow, deliberate, outside my tent. I tried to convince myself it was a coyote or the wind, but the breathing was too measured, too aware, and it came from multiple directions. My heart raced. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent quickly, swinging the light around. The desert was empty. No tracks, no sign that anyone had been there. Just sand. I sat in the tent all night, knees against my chest, waiting for the sun. When morning came, the desert seemed calm again, mercilessly sunlit and dry. But when I went outside, I noticed the tracks, hundreds of them stretching in patterns I could barely understand. They circled my campsite, then disappeared, vanishing into the sand as though they had never existed. I began to realize the desert was teaching me something, watching me, learning me. I felt it in every movement, every glance. My reflection in the rearview mirror no longer felt like my own. I kept seeing shapes in the cab, tall, thin, looming figures, and every time I turned, they vanished. I started sleeping with the keys in my hand, ready to drive, ready to flee. By the 5th day, I knew I had lost my sense of distance. The landmarks I had memorized seemed to shift when I wasn't looking. Roads I had taken for hours led me back to where I had started. The sun felt different, lower than it should have been at midday. Something in the desert was bending reality, and it was aware of me. That night, the terror became physical. I woke to scratching on the tent walls, long, thin fingers dragging across the nylon. I froze. I wanted to scream, but no sound came. The scraping circled me, slow, deliberate, as though whatever it was knew I was awake but didn't want to provoke me yet. I lay perfectly still until it stopped. Morning revealed more tracks. They led to the edge of my campsite, then up a nearby ridge. I followed them cautiously, rifle in hand, only to find the remains of a small camp, charred wood, torn cloth, nothing else. The desert had swallowed everything. No bodies, no footprints leaving the site, only the evidence of something ancient and patient. I began to see figures everywhere, shadows tall and thin, tilting heads pacing at a distance. They mirrored my movements subtly, always out of reach. Sometimes I swear I caught one mimicking my gestures perfectly, stopping whenever I did. The desert was alive in a way I couldn't comprehend. It wasn't just sand and rock, it was a predator, and I was the prey. By the 7th day, I was nearly delirious. My water was almost gone, and I had started to hallucinate. I saw people wandering the dunes, calling my name, faces blurred and indistinct. I thought I saw my own truck, parked in a canyon that didn't exist. I chased it, only to find sand and rocks, undisturbed as if I had never been there. The final night was the worst. I had stumbled into a shallow canyon, thinking the walls might hide me. I set up a minimal camp, exhausted, dehydrated, barely conscious. Then I saw them, dozens of figures pacing along the rim, silhouetted against the stars, tall, thin, unnatural, heads tilting at impossible angles, eyes that reflected nothing but blackness. They didn't move toward me, but I knew they could. I tried to sleep, couldn't. I felt them learning me, studying me, preparing. And then I realized the truth. The desert didn't just want me dead. It wanted to know me, to understand me, to replace me. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of their presence. I ran. I don't know how far, hours, maybe days. The desert distorted time. Every dune was a challenge. My legs gave out, my body burned under the relentless sun. And yet, I kept moving, driven by the knowledge that stopping meant the end. At some point, I reached a ridge. The landscape changed. The sand thinned. Mountains rose ahead, foothills I recognized from the edge of a map. Behind me, the desert stretched endlessly, and I could feel their eyes, following, calculating. I crossed into the hills. They didn't follow, not yet. I stumbled into a small town, exhausted and delirious. People stared at me as I collapsed near a diner, muttering about shadows and tracks and figures. No one could understand. They never do. But I survived. Barely. And the desert didn't follow. Not beyond the foothills, at least. But I can't escape it. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, I feel it learning me anyway. In my apartment, in the street, even in reflections in mirrors, I see it. Tall, thin, tilting its head, patient, waiting, knowing. The desert didn't just want to kill me. It wanted to make sure I understood what happens to those who wander too far, alone. That there are places in this world where time bends, where the land is alive, and where something waits to learn your face, your voice, your movements, until one day it can wear you like a mask. I survived, but I am not the same, and I know the desert is patient. One day it will find me again. I should have known something was wrong the moment the road disappeared from my GPS. 1 second, I was following a clear route through the mountains, and the next, the screen glitched into a blue haze before going blank. I tapped it a few times, but nothing brought it back. Typical Appalachia, I thought. Cell signal comes and goes. It didn't worry me at first. I'd driven through the region dozens of times for work, but this time felt different, though I couldn't explain why. I was on my way to interview a retired park ranger for a podcast episode about unsolved disappearances. Appalachia, especially the deeper regions, had more of them per capita than nearly anywhere in the country. Locals had stories, dark ones, stories of hikers vanishing feet from a trail or hunters found days later barefoot and babbling nonsense. I'd built a reputation for investigating strange tales with an open mind, but a logical perspective. There was always an explanation. Always. But that belief broke in the mountains of deep Appalachia on a road no longer visible on my GPS. The canopy thickened until the sunlight barely touched the pavement. The pavement itself narrowed, cracked, swallowed by weeds. I rolled the windows down, expecting to hear the normal sounds of forest, birds, insects, wind. Nothing, not even distant rustling. The silence made the woods feel staged, like a painting someone forgot to finish. A few miles later, I saw a sign nailed to a tree, hand-painted and crooked. Fog Hollow, 5 miles. Fog Hollow wasn't the place I was headed. In fact, I'd never heard of it. Still, it was the only sign of civilization I'd seen in half an hour, so I kept going. The ranger I planned to meet could wait. I figured Fog Hollow might be close enough to ask for directions. But the farther I drove, the more the air pressed against my chest. Heavy, cold, metallic. I tried to shake it off as mountain weather, but the feeling only grew sharper. About a mile out from the sign, something crossed the road ahead of me. At first I thought it was a deer, until it stood upright. The figure was tall, too tall. It moved strangely, as if each limb operated on its own delay. Thin arms, a long torso, something like hair hanging matted over its face. I slammed the brakes. The figure turned toward me, but not with a natural motion, more like a puppet jerked by invisible strings. Then, it stepped into the woods and vanished. Every instinct told me to turn the car around, but there was no room to turn on the narrow mountain road, and reversing for miles wasn't practical. Besides, I convinced myself, maybe it was just a sick animal. Hunger and disease do strange things to wildlife. I drove on. Fog settled around me, growing so thick I could only see a few yards ahead. The temperature dropped sharply. Goosebumps crawled over my arms. I rubbed them and told myself to stay focused. Fog was normal in the Appalachians. Locals even said it had a personality, came and went as it pleased. But this fog felt deliberate, as if it was following me. Finally, the forest opened into a small valley. At its center was a town, or what used to be a town. Half a dozen houses slumped against each other like rotting teeth. A church steeple tilted sideways. A creek cut through the center, black and slow-moving. Fog Hollow. My car sputtered, then died completely right at the town's edge. I turned the key. Nothing. The air smelled sour, like wet stone and iron. Great, I muttered. Perfect place for a breakdown. I stepped out. The moment my boots hit the ground, the silence became unbearable. The kind that made you aware of your own heartbeat. I called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" No response. I walked toward the closest house. Its porch sagged inward, boards warped from decades of neglect. As I stepped toward the window, I noticed something odd inside the glass. Not movement, not a figure. A shape, tall and thin, standing just out of view. When I blinked, it was gone. My mind tried to explain it. Reflection, shadow, imagination. anything but the truth. I moved deeper into the hollow. The fog swirled around my legs as if nudging me in a specific direction, to the church. Its front door was open, hanging crooked. Inside, the pews were overturned. The altar was smashed. Hymnals lay scattered, pages ripped, waterlogged. But it wasn't vandalism. It was more like something enormous had moved through. In the corner of the church lay a journal, old, leather-bound, swollen from dampness. Curiosity overpowered fear. I opened it. Most pages were smeared beyond reading, but one entry was clear enough to make out. They come from the fog, not spirits, not beasts, something older. They mimic shapes to lure us. They want us to look. Once we see them clearly, they never let us go. We barricade ourselves every night, but the fog is growing. The town is dying. A cold shudder ran through me. I snapped the journal shut and backed out of the church. Outside, the fog was thicker. My car was barely visible. I started toward it, but froze. A voice drifted through the fog, a woman's voice. "Help me, please." My blood ran cold. The voice sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it. Not at first. Then it hit me. It was my mother's voice. She had been dead for 8 years. "Please, I need your help." I shook my head. No, that's not real." The voice came again, this time closer. "Come here." I stumbled backward, heart pounding. The fog in front of me shifted, forming a vague human outline. Then 2. Then 3. Shadows. Tall, thin, bending at impossible angles. I bolted to the nearest house. The door was unlocked, and I slammed it shut behind me. Inside was pitch black, except for a faint light coming through warped shutters. The air smelled of dust and something sweet. Too sweet. As my eyes adjusted, I realized the walls were covered in carvings, dozens of them, scratches forming shapes of tall, distorted figures with hollow eyes and stretched limbs. Over and over again, hundreds of them. Something thumped against the outside wall, slow, heavy. I pressed myself against the interior wall, trying to quiet my breathing. The thumping circled the house, once, twice, then paused outside the door. The doorknob turned, once, twice, slowly. I held my breath. The knob stopped turning. Silence returned. Then, through the wood of the door, a voice whispered, "Let me in." But it wasn't my mother's voice anymore. It was mine. I clamped my eyes shut. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. Finally, after what felt like hours, the presence withdrew. When morning light crept through the shutters, I dared to step outside. The fog was gone. My car started on the first try. I tore out of Fog Hollow without looking back. When I reached cell signal, I searched everything I could about Fog Hollow. Nothing came up. No history, no records, no ghost town lists, nothing. I contacted the retired ranger I'd planned to interview. When I mentioned the town name, he went silent. Finally, he asked, "You went there? Fog Hollow?" "You know it?" I asked, relieved to hear some confirmation. "Not anymore," he said. "That place shouldn't exist. Flood wiped it out in the 1940s. 12 people vanished before the government sealed the valley. Locals say the fog itself became wrong." I swallowed hard. "Something's still there." His voice lowered. "Did you look at anything in the fog?" "No, I don't think so." "Good. Then don't go back. And if the fog ever finds you again, don't listen to it." That should have been the end of it. But some nights, more often lately, I wake up to a thin veil of fog creeping under my bedroom door. And from somewhere inside it, a voice, my voice, whispers softly, "Come outside." I don't answer. I don't look. But I know the fog followed me out of the mountains, and it's getting closer. If this story kept you on edge, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for the next one.